Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing in a sun-drenched valley in Tuscany, where the morning mist clings to rolling hills like memories waiting to be born. The year is 1452, and the world is about to witness the arrival of a soul who would see what others could not, dream what others dared not, and create what seemed impossible. His name was Leonardo da Vinci. And tonight, we journey through the tapestry of his extraordinary life, a life that unfolded like a Renaissance painting, brushstroke by brushstroke, shadow by light. But before we begin this journey through time, if this story speaks to your soul, consider subscribing to Dreaming of Past. Leave a comment and tell us what other fascinating lives you'd love to explore together in the quiet hours of the night. Now, dim the lights. Let the world outside fade away. Close your eyes and listen. Tonight, we walk beside a genius through the corridors of history, where art and science dance together in the candlelight of the past. In the gentle hills of Vinci, where olive groves whisper secrets to the wind and the Arno River carries dreams toward the sea, a child was born between two worlds. The church bells of San Pantaleo rang out across the valley on that April morning in 1452. But they could not have known they were announcing the arrival of a mind that would reshape humanity's understanding of itself. Leonardo was born to Ser Piero, a notary whose quill scratched across parchments in the service of law and order, and Caterina, a young woman whose love story with Ser Piero bloomed and faded like wildflowers in spring. The child would grow up knowing the weight of being both claimed and unclaimed, legitimate enough to bear his father's care, yet forever marked by the gentle stigma of his birth. Picture young Leonardo wandering the terraced hillsides of his grandfather's estate, his bare feet feeling the warmth of sun-baked earth, his curious fingers tracing the delicate veins of leaves, the rough bark of ancient chestnut trees. The world around him pulsed with mysteries that called to something deep within his soul. Why did water flow downhill? How did birds command the sky? What secrets lay hidden in the way light painted shadows across his grandfather's weathered face? His childhood was a symphony of questions that adults couldn't answer. While other children played with wooden toys, Leonardo found himself captivating and slightly frightening the villagers, with his intense gaze and his strange habit of writing from right to left, as if he were creating a secret language meant only for the angels to read. In the evenings, as the Tuscan sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, young Leonardo would sit by the window of his grandfather's house, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the landscape. His grandmother, Mona Lucia, would find him there, lost in contemplation, his small hand moving across any surface he could find. Drawing, always drawing. Birds in flight, the curve of a flower's stem, the way fabric fell across a chair. "What do you see, little one?" she would ask, and Leonardo would look up with eyes that seemed to hold depths beyond his years. "Everything," he would whisper. "I see everything." The boy who would become the master lived in a world where apprenticeships determined destinies, where the son of a notary might be expected to follow in his father's footsteps, managing the careful dance of contracts and inheritances. But Ser Piero, looking at his son's drawings scattered across every available surface, began to sense that Leonardo's path lay elsewhere, in the realm of creation, where the divine spark of imagination met the patient craft of human hands. As Leonardo grew from child to youth, the hills of Vinci became his first academy. He learned to read the language of nature, the way morning light revealed the architecture of spider webs, the way the muscles of his grandfather's old horse shifted beneath its skin, the way human faces changed when touched by different emotions. Every observation became a treasure stored in the vast library of his mind. The medieval world was giving way to something new, something that would later be called the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical learning and artistic achievement. But for now, in the quiet valleys of Tuscany, it was simply the world of a remarkable boy who saw miracles in the ordinary and spent his days trying to capture them with charcoal and ink. In the silence of those evenings, as the stars emerged above the hills of Vinci, Leonardo would lie awake listening to the night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of owls, the whisper of wind through olive groves. He was learning to listen, to observe, to question. He was preparing, though he didn't know it yet, to become a bridge between the ancient wisdom of the past and the infinite possibilities of the future. The child of two worlds was growing into a citizen of all worlds, art and science, earth and sky, the known and the unknowable. And soon, very soon, the wider world would call to him, drawing him from these gentle hills toward the magnificent turbulent cities where his genius would find its fullest expression. But for now, in the fading light of another Tuscan day, he was simply Leonardo, a boy who dreamed in images and thought in questions, carrying within him the seeds of wonders that would bloom across centuries. The morning Florence revealed itself to 15-year-old Leonardo. The city seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the Renaissance. Through the narrow streets, past the towering dome of the cathedral and the imposing walls of the Medici palaces, young Leonardo walked beside his father toward a destiny that would shape not just his own life, but the very definition of artistic genius. The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio stood like a temple to creation itself. Here, beneath vaulted ceilings stained with decades of paint and plaster dust, the air hummed with the sound of chisels on marble, the scratch of charcoal on paper, the whispered discussions of masters and apprentices debating the perfect curve of a saint's halo or the precise angle of a warrior's sword. Verrocchio himself was a man of quiet intensity, his hands permanently stained with the pigments of his trade, his eyes capable of seeing through to the soul of any subject. When he looked at Leonardo for the first time, something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, or simply the master's intuition that this young man from Vinci carried within him fires that would need careful tending. "Show me your hands," Verrocchio said, and Leonardo extended his long, elegant fingers. The master turned them over, studying the calluses already forming from drawing, the slight tremor of nervous energy that spoke of a mind that moved faster than the body could follow. "These hands will create wonders," Verrocchio murmured, "but first they must learn the language of humility." And so Leonardo's true education began. In the pre-dawn darkness, he would rise with the other apprentices to prepare the day's materials, grinding pigments from rare minerals, mixing oils with the precision of an alchemist, stretching canvases with the patience of a monk, copying scripture. The workshop became his universe, a place where the sacred and the secular merged in the act of creation. But Leonardo was not like the other apprentices. While they focused on mastering the techniques their master taught, Leonardo questioned everything. Why did certain colors seem to advance while others receded? How did the human eye perceive depth and distance? What was the mathematical relationship between beauty and proportion? His notebooks began to fill with observations that went far beyond the requirements of his training. He would dissect dead animals in secret, studying the architecture of bone and muscle, the branching patterns of veins and arteries. He would spend hours watching water flow around stones in the Arno, making note of every eddy and current, every way the liquid seemed to think as it moved. The other apprentices sometimes found him strange, this young man who asked too many questions and seemed to see too much. But Verrocchio watched with growing fascination as Leonardo's talent revealed itself in layer upon layer of brilliance. The young man could draw with either hand, with equal skill. He could mix colors that seemed to glow from within. He could capture not just the appearance of his subjects, but their essence, their inner life made visible. The moment that would pass into legend came during the creation of Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ. The master had assigned Leonardo to paint one of the angels attending the sacred scene. As Leonardo worked, losing himself in the meditation of creation, something extraordinary happened. The angel that emerged from his brush seemed to breathe, to exist in a realm beyond the merely physical. Its face held a beauty that was almost otherworldly, its expression a perfect balance of reverence and joy. When Verrocchio saw what his student had created, the workshop fell silent. The master stared at the angel for a long moment, then slowly set down his own brush. Legend says that Verrocchio never painted again, recognizing that his student had already surpassed him. But Leonardo barely noticed the stir his work had caused. He was already lost in his next question, his next observation. In the evenings, when the workshop grew quiet and the last light faded from the windows, he would work by candlelight, filling page after page with his mirror writing, recording his thoughts on everything from the flight of birds to the structure of flowers to the way light played across a human face. The years in Verrocchio's workshop were years of becoming. Leonardo learned the technical mastery that would serve him throughout his life. But more importantly, he learned to trust his own vision. He discovered that art was not merely about copying the world, but about revealing the hidden connections that bound all things together. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the Florentine night, Leonardo would climb to the roof of the workshop and look out over the city. The lights in the windows below seemed like stars fallen to earth, and he would imagine all the lives being lived behind those flickering flames, the merchants and scholars, the artists and dreamers, all part of the great tapestry of human existence. He was no longer the country boy from Vinci. He was becoming Leonardo da Vinci, master of his craft, student of the universe, a man who would spend his life trying to understand the beautiful, terrible, wonderful mystery of existence itself. And in the morning, he would return to his easel, his notebooks, his endless questions carrying within him the growing certainty that he had been born not just to create art, but to unlock the secrets of creation itself. The morning Leonardo opened his own workshop in Florence, the city bells seemed to ring with a different music, the sound of a young master claiming his place in the world. At 25, he was no longer the wide-eyed apprentice from Vinci, but a man whose reputation had begun to whisper through the narrow streets and grand palazzos of the Renaissance capital. His new workshop, modest but filled with promise, became a laboratory of wonder. Here, surrounded by half-finished paintings and notebooks filled with his peculiar mirror writing, Leonardo began to explore the boundaries of what art could be. The walls were lined with anatomical drawings so precise they seemed to pulse with life, mechanical designs that looked like glimpses into the future, and studies of faces that captured not just appearance, but the very essence of human emotion. The commissions came slowly at first. The Florentine art world was dominated by established masters, and Leonardo was still proving himself as an independent artist. But those who did seek him out quickly discovered that they were not simply purchasing a painting. They were investing in a vision that would challenge everything they thought they knew about art. When the monks of San Donato approached him to paint an Adoration of the Magi, Leonardo accepted the commission with the enthusiasm of a man who saw infinite possibilities in every project. But as he began to work, something extraordinary happened. The traditional biblical scene began to transform under his brush into something unprecedented, a psychological drama that revealed the inner lives of every figure gathered around the Holy Family. Night after night, Leonardo worked by candlelight, building up layers of paint with a patience that bordered on the meditative. He would step back from his easel and study his work with the intensity of a scientist observing a crucial experiment. Each face in the crowd told a story. Each gesture revealed a different response to the miracle unfolding before them. Wonder, fear, joy, skepticism, transcendence. But Leonardo's mind was not content to remain within the boundaries of any single project. His notebooks from this period reveal a restless genius exploring every corner of the known world and imagining what lay beyond. He designed flying machines that would not be built for centuries, war engines that combined the precision of engineering with the devastating efficiency of his mathematical mind, and architectural concepts that seemed to anticipate cities that did not yet exist. The young women of Florence began to speak of the master's intense gaze, the way he would study faces in the street with such concentration that people would stop and stare. He was learning to read the human face like a book, to understand how the subtle play of muscles revealed the thoughts and emotions within. His portrait sketches from this period capture not just the appearance of his subjects, but their souls. The way a merchant's eyes revealed his anxiety about a risky venture, the way a young mother's smile held both joy and exhaustion. In the evenings, when the workshop grew quiet and the city settled into its dreams, Leonardo would often walk the streets of Florence, his notebooks tucked under his arm, his mind buzzing with questions that had no easy answers. He would pause at the Arno River, watching the water flow past in patterns that seemed to echo the curls of hair in his paintings, the spiral shells he had studied, the way smoke rose from chimneys in the still air. Everything was connected. This was the revelation that grew stronger with each passing month. The same mathematical principles that governed the flight of birds also determined the proportions of the human body. The same forces that shaped the flow of water through rivers also influenced the way blood moved through human veins. The same divine geometry that created the perfect spiral of a flower also appeared in the structure of the human ear. But Florence, for all its beauty and opportunity, was beginning to feel too small for Leonardo's expanding vision. The political tensions between the city-states of Italy were growing more intense, and ambitious young men were looking beyond the familiar horizons of their birth. From the north came stories of French courts hungry for Italian expertise, of wealthy patrons who would pay handsomely for the kind of innovation that Leonardo represented. And from Milan came the most intriguing invitation of all, a chance to work for Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, a man who dreamed of creating a court that would rival the legendary centers of learning in the ancient world. The Duke was said to be particularly interested in military engineering and grand public works, areas where Leonardo's unique combination of artistic vision and scientific precision could find their fullest expression. As Leonardo stood in his workshop one evening, surrounded by the works of his early independent years, he felt the familiar stirring of restlessness that had driven him from Vinci to Florence and would soon drive him from Florence to Milan. The Adoration of the Magi remained unfinished on his easel, not from lack of skill or commitment, but because his mind was already racing toward new challenges, new questions, new possibilities. The young master who had once been content to learn the techniques of his craft was evolving into something unprecedented, an artist, scientist, engineer, philosopher who refused to accept the boundaries between disciplines. He was becoming, though the term would not be coined for centuries, a Renaissance man in the truest sense. And in the morning, he would begin making preparations for the journey north, carrying with him the accumulated wisdom of his Florentine years and the growing certainty that his greatest works still lay ahead, waiting to be born in the collision between his boundless imagination and the infinite mystery of the world. The road from Florence to Milan stretched through the autumn landscape like a path between worlds. As Leonardo's horse picked its way through the morning mist, past vineyards heavy with harvest and hills painted in shades of gold and crimson, the young master carried with him more than just his belongings. He carried a letter that would change his life forever. The letter to Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, was unlike any artist's petition ever written. Instead of humble requests for patronage or promises of beautiful paintings, Leonardo had written a document that read like a manifesto from the future. He offered to design bridges that could be built and destroyed at will, war machines that could breach any fortification, systems of irrigation that would bring prosperity to the ducal lands, and entertainments that would astound the civilized world. "I can execute sculpture in marble, bronze, and clay," he had written, "and in painting can do any kind of work as well as any other, whosoever he may be." It was a bold claim, but Milan would prove to be the perfect stage for Leonardo's boundless ambitions. The court of Ludovico Sforza was a universe unto itself, a place where the practical needs of governance merged with the highest aspirations of human culture. Here, in the halls of the Castello Sforzesco, Leonardo found himself not just as an artist, but as a member of an extraordinary community of scholars, engineers, musicians, and philosophers who gathered around the Duke like planets around the sun. Ludovico himself was a man of contrasts, a political pragmatist who dreamed of creating a new Athens in northern Italy, a patron who could discuss military strategy with the same passion he brought to debates about art and architecture. When he looked at Leonardo, he saw not just another court artist, but a man who might help him achieve his grand vision of Milan as the intellectual capital of the world. Leonardo's first major commission was typical of the Duke's ambitious thinking, a massive equestrian statue honoring Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza. The proposed monument would be the largest bronze sculpture ever attempted, a technical challenge that required Leonardo to become not just an artist, but a metallurgist, engineer, and architect all at once. For months, Leonardo studied horses with the same intensity he had once brought to human anatomy. He filled notebook after notebook with observations of how horses moved, how their muscles shifted beneath their skin, how the play of light and shadow revealed the architecture of their bodies. He haunted the ducal stables, sketching the same horse from dozens of angles, trying to understand the essential nature of equine power and grace. The clay model that emerged from his workshop was a miracle of artistic achievement. Standing in the courtyard of the castle, the massive horse seemed to breathe with life, its proportions perfect, its pose capturing the moment between stillness and motion. Visitors from across Europe came to see it, and many declared it the most beautiful sculpture they had ever encountered. But the bronze casting proved to be an insurmountable challenge. The amount of metal required was staggering, and as political tensions grew across northern Italy, the Duke was forced to divert the bronze intended for the statue to the creation of cannons. The great horse would remain forever in clay, a monument to both achievement and the harsh realities of Renaissance politics. Yet Leonardo's time in Milan was filled with triumphs that more than compensated for the disappointment of the unfinished statue. He designed elaborate court entertainments that combined mechanical marvels with theatrical spectacle, rotating stages that revealed hidden paradises, mechanical birds that sang like their living counterparts, water features that seemed to defy the laws of physics. In the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, Leonardo began work on what would become his most famous painting, The Last Supper. The monks had requested a simple depiction of Christ's final meal with his disciples, but Leonardo saw in the commission an opportunity to explore the deepest mysteries of human emotion and divine revelation. For 3 years, he worked on the painting with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He would arrive at the convent before dawn and work until the light failed, sometimes standing motionless before the wall for hours, studying the interplay of expressions he had created. The monks complained that he was working too slowly, but Leonardo explained that he was not simply painting figures. He was trying to capture the precise moment when Christ announced his betrayal, the instant when 12 different souls registered the shock of his words. The technique he developed for the Last Supper was revolutionary. Instead of painting in traditional fresco, which required working quickly while the plaster was still wet, Leonardo experimented with an oil-based medium that would allow him to work slowly, to build up layers of subtle color and expression. The result was a painting that seemed to glow from within, where every face told a story and every gesture revealed a different response to the divine drama unfolding before them. In the evenings, when the court settled into its quieter rhythms, Leonardo would often retreat to his workshop to pursue his private studies. His notebooks from the Milan period reveal a mind that was simultaneously focused and wildly curious, capable of moving from detailed anatomical drawings to mechanical designs to philosophical reflections to mathematical calculations, all within the span of a few pages. He was learning to see the world as a vast, interconnected system, where the same principles that governed the flight of birds also determined the flow of blood through human veins, where the mathematical ratios that created beautiful architecture also appeared in the proportions of flowers and the structure of the human face. The court of Milan had become his laboratory, his academy, his home. Here, surrounded by the greatest minds of his generation, Leonardo was becoming the universal genius that history would remember. Not just an artist, but a student of life itself, a man who refused to accept the boundaries between art and science, between the possible and the impossible. And in the candlelit silence of his workshop, as he worked on designs for flying machines and siege engines, anatomical studies and architectural plans, Leonardo was laying the foundation for a legacy that would inspire wonder for centuries to come. The morning Milan fell to the French armies, Leonardo stood in his workshop surrounded by the accumulated treasures of 17 years, notebooks filled with mirror writing, mechanical designs that seemed to glimpse the future, and anatomical drawings so precise they revealed the very architecture of life itself. The great clay horse in the courtyard had been destroyed by French soldiers using it for target practice, but Leonardo's mind was already turning toward new horizons, new questions, new mysteries to unravel. The collapse of Ludovico's court scattered the community of scholars and artists that had gathered around the Duke like seeds on the wind. Some fled to other Italian courts, others sought refuge in France, but Leonardo chose a different path. He would return to Florence, but not as the young man who had left nearly 2 decades earlier. He was now a master in the fullest sense, carrying within him knowledge that would reshape humanity's understanding of itself. The Florence he returned to was a city transformed. The Medici had been driven from power, and the fiery preacher Savonarola had briefly turned the Renaissance capital into a theocratic state before his own dramatic downfall. The city was rebuilding itself, both physically and spiritually, and there was a hunger for works of art that could speak to the complexity of human experience. But Leonardo's attention was increasingly drawn to mysteries that lay beneath the surface of visible reality. In the hospital of Santo Spirito, he had begun a systematic study of human anatomy that would revolutionize medical knowledge. Working by candlelight in the morgue, he dissected corpse after corpse with the precision of a scientist and the reverence of a monk, mapping the intricate geography of the human body with an accuracy that would not be equaled for centuries. His anatomical drawings from this period are masterpieces of both art and science. Each organ is rendered with perfect precision, but more than that, they reveal Leonardo's understanding of the body as a miraculous machine designed by divine intelligence. He traced the path of blood through the heart, mapped the nervous system, studied the mechanics of breathing and digestion. His drawing of the fetus in the womb captures not just the physical reality of prenatal development, but the wonder of new life forming in the darkness. The human body, he wrote in his mirror script, is a universe in miniature. The dissections were conducted in secret, for the church officially forbade such work. But Leonardo was driven by a compulsion that transcended religious prohibition. He needed to understand how the machine of the body worked, how the spark of life animated dead matter, how the soul expressed itself through flesh and bone. His studies of the human eye were particularly revolutionary. He discovered that the eye was not simply a window through which the soul peered out at the world, but a complex optical instrument that actively processed and interpreted visual information. He mapped the muscles that controlled the pupil, traced the optic nerve back to the brain, and developed theories about how the mind constructed its perception of reality from the raw data of sensation. Between his anatomical studies and his artistic commissions, Leonardo found time to pursue his investigations into the nature of water, which he considered one of the fundamental forces of creation. He studied how water moved through the human body, how it carved landscapes, how it could be harnessed for human purposes. His designs for hydraulic systems and water management would influence engineering for centuries to come. But it was during this period that Leonardo received a commission that would produce one of the most famous paintings in human history. Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a prosperous Florentine merchant, came to sit for her portrait, and something in her face captured Leonardo's imagination in a way that few subjects ever had. The painting that would become known as the Mona Lisa began as a conventional portrait commission, but under Leonardo's brush it evolved into something unprecedented. Working with layers of transparent glazes built up over months of patient labor, he created a face that seemed to exist in a realm between the physical and the spiritual, a smile that suggested depths of knowledge and mystery that could never be fully plumbed. The technique he developed for the painting, sfumato, the subtle gradation of colors and tones without sharp outlines, was the visual equivalent of his anatomical discoveries. Just as his dissections revealed the hidden structures beneath the skin, his painting technique revealed the hidden life beneath the surface of appearance. Night after night, Leonardo worked on the portrait, building up layers of meaning as well as paint. The face that emerged seemed to know secrets that it would never reveal, to smile with the wisdom of someone who had seen both the beauty and the tragedy of human existence. The eyes followed the viewer with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural, and the hands, folded in serene contemplation, suggested an inner peace that transcended the concerns of daily life. The painting became an obsession. Leonardo carried it with him wherever he went, continuing to work on it for years, never quite satisfied that he had captured all the mysteries he saw in Lisa's face. It was as if he were trying to paint not just a person, but the very essence of human consciousness itself. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the city slept and the workshop was lit only by the flicker of candles, Leonardo would stand before his easel and contemplate the face he had created. It seemed to him that he was approaching something fundamental about the nature of existence, the way consciousness emerged from matter, the way the soul expressed itself through the body, the way art could capture truths that science alone could never reach. The anatomist's quest had become an artist's meditation, a scientific investigation that was also a spiritual journey. And in the growing perfection of that mysterious smile, Leonardo was discovering that the greatest mysteries of all were not to be found in the stars or in the hidden machinery of the body, but in the ineffable depths of human consciousness itself. The morning Cesare Borgia summoned Leonardo to his court, the artist-scientist found himself facing a paradox that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Here was a man who represented everything Leonardo found troubling about human nature: ruthless ambition, political cunning, the casual use of violence to achieve power. Yet Cesare was also a patron who offered Leonardo the resources and freedom to pursue his most ambitious projects. The Duke of Romagna was attempting to carve out a new state in central Italy through a combination of military brilliance and political manipulation. He needed engineers who could design fortifications that would withstand the increasingly sophisticated cannons of the era, siege engines that could breach any wall, and defensive systems that would protect his territories from the armies of his enemies. Leonardo accepted the commission with the conflicted feelings of a man who understood that his genius could be used for both creation and destruction. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind grappling with the moral implications of his work, even as he threw himself into the technical challenges with his characteristic intensity. The war machines he designed for Cesare were marvels of engineering that seemed to anticipate the mechanized warfare of future centuries. He created multi-barreled cannons that could fire a devastating barrage, armored vehicles that could protect soldiers as they advanced across battlefields, and siege towers that could be assembled and disassembled with remarkable speed. But perhaps his most significant contribution to Cesare's military campaigns was his work as a cartographer. Moving across the Italian countryside with the Duke's armies, Leonardo created maps of unprecedented accuracy and detail. He developed new techniques for measuring distances and elevations, for representing three-dimensional terrain on flat surfaces, for capturing the strategic importance of rivers, roads, and fortifications. His map of the town of Imola, created during the winter of 1502, is a masterpiece of both art and science. Drawn from a bird's-eye perspective that was revolutionary for its time, it shows not just the layout of streets and buildings, but the relationship between the town and the surrounding landscape. Every detail is rendered with mathematical precision, yet the overall effect is one of breathtaking beauty, a work of art that also served as a crucial military document. Leonardo's relationship with Cesare was complex and often uncomfortable. The Duke was undeniably brilliant, capable of strategic thinking that matched Leonardo's own intellectual gifts, but he was also utterly ruthless, willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. Leonardo watched with fascination and horror as Cesare eliminated his enemies through a combination of political manipulation, military force, and outright assassination. In his notebooks, Leonardo struggled to reconcile his admiration for Cesare's tactical genius with his revulsion at the Duke's methods. "He who wishes to see how a soul dwells in its body," he wrote, "should look to see how this body uses its daily habitation." The paradox deepened when Leonardo realized that his own contributions to Cesare's military machine were directly responsible for the suffering and death of thousands of people. The fortifications he designed were meant to protect, but they also enabled Cesare's campaigns of conquest. The maps he created were works of art, but they also facilitated the movements of armies that brought destruction to peaceful towns and villages. It was during this period that Leonardo began to develop his pacifist philosophy, the belief that war was the most bestial madness and that the true purpose of human intelligence was to create rather than destroy. Yet he continued to work on military projects, driven by a combination of intellectual curiosity and practical necessity. His designs for flying machines took on new urgency during these years. If human beings could master the air, he reasoned, they might be able to escape the endless cycle of territorial conflicts that plagued the Italian peninsula. He studied birds with renewed intensity, trying to understand the mechanics of flight, the relationship between wing design and lifting power, the way air currents could be used to achieve sustained flight. The flying machine he designed for Cesare was based on his observations of bats and birds, with wings that could be operated by a combination of human muscle power and mechanical advantage. He chose a location near Florence for the first test flight, a hill that offered both the necessary elevation and relative privacy for what he knew would be a dangerous experiment. The test was a failure. The machine crashed almost immediately, and the pilot, one of Leonardo's assistants, was seriously injured. But Leonardo was not discouraged. He had learned valuable lessons about the relationship between weight and lifting power, about the importance of control surfaces, about the need for a power source more reliable than human muscle. When Cesare's political fortunes began to decline, Leonardo found himself once again without a patron, but the experience had changed him profoundly. He had seen the heights of human ambition and the depths of human cruelty, and he had discovered that his own genius could be used for purposes that troubled his conscience. The warrior's paradox, the recognition that the same intelligence that could create beauty could also design destruction, would remain with Leonardo for the rest of his life. It would influence his later work, his choice of projects, and his growing conviction that the true purpose of human knowledge was not to dominate the world, but to understand it, to celebrate it, and to find ways for human beings to live in harmony with the natural order. In the quiet of his workshop, as he worked on designs for irrigation systems and architectural projects, Leonardo began to envision a different kind of future, one where human intelligence was used not to wage war, but to create a world where war would no longer be necessary. It was a vision that would guide him through the remaining years of his life, a dream of human potential that transcended the bitter realities of Renaissance politics. The morning Leonardo arrived in Rome, the Eternal City seemed to pulse with the energy of renewal. Pope Leo X, Giovanni de' Medici, had ascended to the papal throne, and with him came a new era of patronage that promised to transform Rome into the artistic and intellectual capital of the world. The construction of the new saint. Peter's Basilica was underway. Michelangelo was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and Raphael was decorating the papal apartments with frescoes that would define the High Renaissance. But Leonardo, now in his 60s, found himself in an unusual position. He was universally acknowledged as one of the greatest artists of his generation, yet he was increasingly drawn to projects that pushed the boundaries of pure art into the realm of engineering and scientific inquiry. The papal court, magnificent as it was, sometimes seemed too concerned with traditional artistic achievement to fully appreciate the revolutionary nature of his vision. His workshop in the Belvedere courtyard became a laboratory where art and science merged in ways that even his earlier work had not achieved. Here, surrounded by mechanical models and anatomical drawings, astronomical instruments and architectural plans, Leonardo pursued investigations that would have profound implications for the future of human knowledge. His studies of water flow had evolved into a comprehensive theory of hydraulics that anticipated many of the principles that would later be formalized by modern engineering. He designed systems for draining swamps, channeling rivers, and creating artificial waterways that could transform the landscape of central Italy. His notebooks from this period contain detailed plans for a navigable canal system that would connect the major rivers of the peninsula, creating a network of waterways that could revolutionize trade and transportation. But it was his work on optics that represented perhaps his most significant contribution to scientific knowledge. Building on his earlier studies of the human eye, Leonardo developed theories about the nature of light and vision that would not be fully understood until centuries later. He discovered that the pupil of the eye changes size in response to the amount of light available, that the eye can be fooled by optical illusions, and that the brain plays an active role in interpreting visual information. His camera obscura experiments revealed how images could be projected and manipulated, laying the groundwork for both photography and cinema. In the darkened chambers of his workshop, Leonardo would watch in fascination as images of the outside world appeared upside down on his screens, trying to understand the mathematical principles that governed the behavior of light rays. The architectural projects that occupied much of his time in Rome were conceived on a scale that matched his expanding vision of human possibility. He designed a new palace for the Medici family that would incorporate revolutionary heating and ventilation systems, mechanical devices for lifting heavy materials, and water features that would create a garden paradise in the heart of the city. His plans for an ideal city went even further, envisioning an urban environment where human needs and natural processes would exist in perfect harmony. The city would be built on multiple levels, with traffic and commerce flowing through underground channels, while residents lived in beautiful neighborhoods connected by tree-lined boulevards and crystal-clear canals. Waste would be processed through ingenious systems that would prevent disease, and the air would be kept pure through carefully planned wind currents and vegetation. But even as Leonardo worked on these grand projects, he was increasingly aware of the passage of time. His hands, once so steady that he could draw a perfect circle without a compass, now trembled slightly when he worked. His eyes, which had seen so much and recorded it all with such precision, sometimes struggled to focus on the fine details that had once been effortless for him to capture. In the evenings, when the papal court settled into its quieter rhythms and the sounds of construction on St. Peter's faded into silence, Leonardo would often walk through the ruins of ancient Rome. Here, among the broken columns and crumbling arches, he found a meditation on the impermanence of human achievement that both sobered and inspired him. The Romans had built an empire that seemed eternal, yet now their greatest monuments lay in fragments, slowly being reclaimed by ivy and weather. But their ideas, their understanding of engineering, their mastery of architecture, their insights into human nature, these had survived and continued to influence the world. It was a lesson that spoke to Leonardo's growing conviction that the most important legacy an artist could leave was not any single work, but the advancement of human knowledge itself. His notebooks from the Roman period reveal a mind increasingly concerned with organizing and preserving the vast accumulation of knowledge he had gathered over a lifetime of investigation. He began to envision treatises on anatomy, on hydraulics, on optics, on flight, comprehensive works that would make his discoveries available to future generations of scholars and artists. But the political situation in Italy was becoming increasingly unstable. The French armies that had driven him from Milan were again threatening the peninsula, and the papal court was consumed with military and diplomatic concerns that left little energy for the kind of pure research that Leonardo most valued. It was then that the invitation arrived from France, a letter from King Francis I, the young monarch who had heard tales of Leonardo's genius and wanted to establish a court that would rival the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. The king offered not just patronage but friendship, not just financial support, but the freedom to pursue whatever investigations his curiosity might suggest. As Leonardo stood in his Roman workshop, surrounded by the incomplete projects and unrealized dreams of his 3 years in the Eternal City, he felt the familiar stirring of restlessness that had driven him from Florence to Milan, from Milan to the wandering years of his middle age, and now from Rome toward what would be his final journey. The engineer's vision had expanded far beyond the traditional boundaries of Renaissance art and learning. He had become something unprecedented, a universal genius who refused to accept the limitations that others imposed on human knowledge. And in France, perhaps, he would find the peace and support necessary to finally organize the vast treasury of observations and insights he had accumulated over a lifetime of relentless curiosity. The morning he prepared to leave Rome, Leonardo looked one last time at the city that had nurtured both the ancient empire and the Renaissance flowering of human achievement. Somewhere in that skyline, in the interplay of old and new, classical and modern, he saw a reflection of his own life, a bridge between the accumulated wisdom of the past and the infinite possibilities of the future. The Loire Valley welcomed Leonardo with the gentle embrace of a French spring. As his traveling party wound through the countryside toward the Château du Clos Lucé, the 74-year-old master found himself in a landscape that seemed designed to soothe both body and spirit. The rolling hills reminded him of his childhood in Tuscany, while the château itself, a gift from King Francis I, promised the peace and privacy he had rarely enjoyed throughout his turbulent career. King Francis was unlike any patron Leonardo had ever served. Young, intellectually curious, and genuinely reverent toward learning, the French monarch had invited Leonardo not to produce specific works of art, but simply to think, to investigate, to share the vast accumulation of knowledge he had gathered over a lifetime of observation and inquiry. "I want you to be free," the king had told him during their first meeting. "Free to pursue whatever questions interest you. Free to organize your thoughts. Free to dream." It was a gift more precious than gold. The gift of time without pressure, of resources without obligation, of respect without the need to constantly prove himself worthy of patronage. Leonardo settled into the chateau with the profound relief of a man who had finally found a place where his restless spirit could be at peace. The workshop he established in the upper floors of the chateau became a temple to human curiosity. Here, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of his lifetime, notebooks filled with observations, mechanical models, anatomical drawings, unfinished paintings, Leonardo began the work of organizing and preserving the knowledge he had spent decades acquiring. His paralyzed right hand made drawing difficult, but his mind remained as sharp as ever, and he had trained himself to work with his left hand with considerable skill. More importantly, he had begun to dictate his thoughts to Francesco Melzi, the devoted young artist who had become his companion, assistant, and the closest thing to a son that Leonardo would ever have. The conversations between the old master and his young protégé continued for hours each day, as Leonardo attempted to transform a lifetime of scattered observations into coherent treatises that could be understood by future generations. They discussed the principles of hydraulics, the mechanics of flight, the structure of the human body, the nature of light and shadow, the mathematical foundations of beauty. But Leonardo's concerns had evolved beyond the technical and scientific into the realm of pure philosophy. In the peaceful gardens of Clos Lucé, surrounded by flowers and fountains, he found himself contemplating the deepest questions of human existence. What was the relationship between mind and matter? How did consciousness emerge from the physical structures of the brain? What was the ultimate purpose of human intelligence? His anatomical studies had convinced him that the human body was a microcosm of the universe itself, governed by the same mathematical principles that determined the motion of planets and the flow of rivers. But his artistic experience had taught him that there were aspects of human existence, love, beauty, transcendence, that could not be reduced to mechanical principles alone. "The soul," he wrote in his final notebooks, "expresses itself through the body, but it is not trapped by the body. In every work of art, in every scientific discovery, in every act of love, the soul reaches beyond the physical towards something eternal." The king visited regularly, drawn by genuine affection for the old master, as much as by intellectual curiosity. Francis would sit in the garden for hours, listening as Leonardo shared his thoughts on everything from military engineering to the education of princes, from the design of cities to the nature of divine creation. These conversations revealed Leonardo as a man who had transcended the traditional boundaries between art and science, between the sacred and the secular, between the practical and the philosophical. He had become a sage, a wise man, whose insights were grounded in direct observation of the natural world, but informed by a spiritual understanding that went far beyond mere technical knowledge. The Mona Lisa, which Leonardo had carried with him throughout his wandering years, hung in his bedroom at Clos Lucé. In the soft light of the French countryside, the painting seemed to have achieved a kind of perfection that even its creator had not fully anticipated. The mysterious smile that had puzzled observers for years now seemed to reflect Leonardo's own hard-won wisdom, the knowledge that life's deepest mysteries could be approached but never fully solved, could be celebrated but never completely understood. His studies of water continued even in these final years, but they had evolved from technical investigations into something approaching mystical contemplation. He saw in the flow of streams and rivers a metaphor for the passage of time, for the way individual lives flowed into the larger currents of human history, for the eternal cycle of creation and dissolution that governed all existence. The mechanical designs that filled his later notebooks were increasingly fantastic, less concerned with practical application than with exploring the theoretical limits of human engineering. He designed machines for exploring the ocean depths, devices for harnessing the power of wind and water, mechanisms that seemed to anticipate technologies that would not be developed for centuries. But perhaps his most important work during these final years was his effort to understand and articulate the principles that had guided his lifelong quest for knowledge. He began to see that his greatest discovery was not any single invention or artistic technique, but the recognition that all knowledge was interconnected, that the same curiosity that drove artistic creation also motivated scientific investigation, that the deepest truths about existence could only be approached through a combination of careful observation, creative imagination, and spiritual insight. In the evenings, as the sun set over the Loire Valley and the chateau settled into peaceful silence, Leonardo would sit in his garden and contemplate the journey that had brought him from the hills of Vinci to this final resting place. He had witnessed the birth of the Renaissance, had helped to create the modern understanding of art and science, had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge in ways that would influence civilization for centuries to come. But more than that, he had discovered that the ultimate purpose of human intelligence was not to dominate the world, but to understand it, not to impose human will upon nature, but to find ways for humanity to live in harmony with the cosmic order that governed all existence. The philosopher's garden had become a place of synthesis, where a lifetime of questions had finally begun to resolve into something approaching wisdom. And in the gathering twilight of his years, Leonardo found a peace that had eluded him throughout his restless, brilliant, endlessly curious life. The winter of 1519 came early to the Loire Valley, and with it, Leonardo felt the first whispers of his own mortality settling into his bones like the frost that gathered on the windows of Clos Lucé. At 67, he was ancient by the standards of his time, yet his mind remained as curious and penetrating as ever, even as his body began to fail him with increasing frequency. The paralysis that had claimed his right hand was spreading, making even simple tasks difficult. Francesco Melzi had become not just his assistant, but his lifeline to the physical world, helping him with everything from mixing paints to organizing the vast collection of notebooks that represented a lifetime of observation and inquiry. But rather than retreating into bitterness or despair, Leonardo found himself approaching the mystery of death with the same methodical curiosity he had brought to every other aspect of existence. Death, after all, was simply the final frontier of human experience, the ultimate question that had to be investigated and understood. His anatomical studies took on new urgency during these months. Working with corpses at the hospital in Amboise, he dissected the bodies of elderly men and women, trying to understand the physical mechanisms of aging and death. What caused the heart to stop beating? How did the life force gradually withdraw from the human frame? Was there anything in the physical structure of the body that could explain the moment when consciousness departed? "The soul departs unwillingly from the body," he wrote, his left hand forming the familiar mirror script that had become second nature to him over the decades. Because of the good companionship of the body with the soul, his drawings from this period show an unprecedented understanding of cardiovascular disease, of the way arteries harden with age, of how the flow of blood gradually becomes restricted until the heart can no longer sustain life. But beyond the technical details, there was something almost tender in his approach to these studies, a recognition that he was not just investigating biological mechanisms, but trying to understand the final chapter of the human story. The king continued his regular visits, but the conversations had taken on a more intimate character. Francis was dealing with his own mortality in a different way, through the establishment of lasting institutions, the creation of a legacy that would survive his physical death. He questioned Leonardo closely about the nature of immortality, about what aspects of human achievement could transcend the grave. "A man's life," Leonardo told him one afternoon as they sat by the fire in the great hall, "is measured not in years, but in the thoughts he thinks, the beauty he creates, the knowledge he passes on to future generations. In this sense, a single moment of true understanding is worth more than decades of mere existence." Leonardo had begun to organize his notebooks with increasing urgency, working with Melzi to create a comprehensive record of his investigations that could be preserved for posterity. The task was enormous, thousands of pages of observations, diagrams, philosophical reflections, and technical designs that spanned every field of human knowledge. But as he reviewed the work of his lifetime, Leonardo was struck not by what he had accomplished, but by how much remained unknown. Every question he had answered had revealed 10 new mysteries. Every secret he had unlocked had shown him vast territories of ignorance that stretched beyond the horizon of human understanding. "I have spent my life," he wrote, "learning to see the questions that others do not even know exist." His unfinished paintings took on new significance during these final months. The saint, John the Baptist, that had occupied him for years, seemed to glow with an inner light that transcended the merely physical. The saint's enigmatic smile and pointing finger suggested mysteries that lay beyond the reach of rational investigation, truths that could only be approached through faith, intuition, and the kind of spiritual insight that comes to those who have spent a lifetime in the patient study of creation. The Mona Lisa continued to fascinate him, and he would sometimes spend entire afternoons studying the face he had created decades earlier. In that mysterious smile, he now saw not just technical mastery, but something approaching prophecy, a recognition that human consciousness was infinitely more complex and beautiful than any mechanical explanation could capture. His designs for flying machines had evolved during these final months into something approaching pure poetry. No longer concerned with practical construction, he created drawings of devices that seemed to capture the essence of flight itself. The dream of transcending the limitations of earthly existence, of joining the birds and angels in the realm of pure spirit. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it brought with it a burst of creative energy that surprised everyone, including Leonardo himself. He began work on a final series of drawings, studies of plants and flowers, that combined scientific accuracy with an almost mystical appreciation for the beauty of natural form. These botanical drawings revealed Leonardo's mature understanding of the relationship between art and science. Every leaf was rendered with perfect accuracy, every flower captured in precise detail, yet the overall effect was one of transcendent beauty that spoke to something deeper than mere visual pleasure. "In every flower," he wrote, "the entire universe reveals its secrets to those who know how to look." As the days grew longer and the gardens of Clos Lucé burst into bloom, Leonardo felt himself entering a state of profound peace. The restless energy that had driven him from project to project, from city to city, from question to question throughout his life, was gradually being replaced by a deep satisfaction with the journey he had completed. He had lived to see his greatest insights confirmed by the work of younger scholars. His anatomical discoveries were being incorporated into medical practice. His engineering principles were being applied to practical projects across Europe. His artistic techniques were being studied and emulated by a new generation of painters who understood that he had fundamentally changed what art could achieve. But more than any specific accomplishment, Leonardo knew that his greatest contribution had been to demonstrate that human curiosity itself was a sacred force, that the drive to understand, to create, to push beyond the boundaries of the known was what made human beings truly divine. In the gathering twilight of his life, surrounded by the beauty of the French countryside and the affection of those who had come to understand his genius, Leonardo prepared for his final journey with the same courage and curiosity that had characterized every other phase of his remarkable existence. The morning of May 2nd, 1519, dawned with unusual clarity over the Loire Valley. In the upper chamber of Clos Lucé, Leonardo da Vinci lay surrounded by the accumulated treasures of a lifetime, notebooks filled with mirror writing, mechanical models that seemed to glimpse the future, and paintings that had redefined what art could achieve. The room was quiet except for the soft scratch of Francesco Melzi's pen as he transcribed his master's final thoughts. Leonardo's breathing had grown shallow during the night, but his mind remained luminous. At dawn, he had asked Melzi to arrange his notebooks in careful order, as if preparing for a journey that would require him to leave his earthly possessions in perfect condition for those who would come after. "The knowledge," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning birdsong that filtered through the open windows. must not die with me." King Francis arrived at mid-morning, having ridden hard from Amboise, when word reached him that the old master was failing. The young monarch had come to think of Leonardo, not just as a court artist, but as a wise grandfather, a man whose insights had helped shape his understanding of what it meant to be both a ruler and a human being. Leonardo's eyes brightened when he saw the king. With great effort, he raised his left hand, the only one that still responded to his will, and placed it on Francis's arm. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice gaining strength from some deep reserve of will, "I have tried to show you that knowledge is not a burden to be carried, but wings to lift the human spirit. Use what I have taught you not to dominate others, but to serve them. The greatest kings are those who make their subjects more than they were before." Francis knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. "Master," he replied, "you have given me more than any teacher could. You have shown me that true nobility lies not in birth or conquest, but in the relentless pursuit of truth and beauty." As the day progressed, Leonardo drifted in and out of consciousness. But during his lucid moments, his thoughts turned to the great questions that had driven his lifelong quest for understanding. He spoke of the interconnectedness of all knowledge, of the way artistic vision and scientific investigation were simply different approaches to the same divine mystery. "I have learned," he told Melzi during one of these moments of clarity, "that the universe is written in the language of mathematics, but it can only be truly understood through the language of the heart. Art and science are not enemies, but lovers, dancing together in the cosmic ballet of creation." His anatomical studies, scattered across tables throughout the room, represented perhaps his most revolutionary contribution to human knowledge. Through his patient dissection of corpses, his careful observation of the human machine, he had discovered truths about the body that would not be confirmed by medical science for centuries. But more than technical knowledge, these studies had revealed to him the profound dignity of human existence, the way the divine expressed itself through flesh and bone, blood and breath. The mechanical designs that filled his notebooks seemed to anticipate technologies that belonged to an unimaginable future. Flying machines, submarines, tanks, parachutes, helicopters, all existed first in Leonardo's imagination, sketched with the precision of an engineer and the vision of a prophet. But he had come to understand that the greatest machine was not any device he could invent, but the human mind itself, capable of infinite curiosity, boundless creativity, and the miraculous ability to transform dreams into reality. His paintings, though relatively few in number, had redefined what art could achieve. The Mona Lisa, resting on an easel near his bed, continued to smile with the mysterious serenity that had captivated viewers for years. In that face, Leonardo had captured something essential about human consciousness, the way awareness of mortality paradoxically created the capacity for transcendence. "She knows," he whispered, gazing at his masterpiece, "what I am only now beginning to understand. That death is not the opposite of life, but its completion, the smile that cannot be explained in words, only felt in the depths of the soul." As evening approached, Leonardo's breathing became more labored, but his spirit seemed to grow lighter. He spoke of his childhood in Vinci, of the moment when he first realized that the world was filled with questions waiting to be asked. He remembered his years in Verrocchio's workshop, where he had learned that technical mastery was only the beginning of artistic achievement. He recalled the courts of Milan and Rome, where he had discovered that knowledge was most beautiful when it served human flourishing rather than human domination. "I have lived," he said, his voice now barely a whisper, "in the most magnificent age in human history. I have seen humanity awakening to its own potential, learning to combine the wisdom of the ancients with the innovations of the present. The Renaissance is not an event but a way of being, the recognition that human beings are capable of continuous rebirth, endless learning, infinite growth." Francesco Melzi leaned close to catch his master's final words. Leonardo's eyes, which had seen so much and recorded it all with such precision, focused one last time on the face of the young man who had been his most faithful companion during these final years. "Tell them," Leonardo whispered, "that I have loved this world. Every mystery I could not solve, every question I could not answer, Every dream I could not realize, it has all been beautiful. Tell them that curiosity is the greatest gift God gave to humanity, and that those who nurture it will never truly die. As the sun set over the Loire Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would have delighted the artist's eye, Leonardo da Vinci drew his last breath. But in the quiet of that room, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime devoted to understanding and creation, it seemed less like an ending than a transformation, the moment when a particular expression of human genius returned to the universal source from which all creativity flows. The master was gone, but his legacy was eternal. In every notebook he had filled, every painting he had created, every insight he had recorded, Leonardo had demonstrated that the human spirit was capable of transcending the limitations of mortality through the simple but revolutionary act of paying attention to the world with love, curiosity, and an unshakable faith in the beauty of existence itself. In the silence that followed Leonardo's death, the chateau at Clos-Lucé seemed to hold its breath. Francesco Melzi, now the guardian of his master's vast intellectual legacy, found himself overwhelmed by the responsibility of preserving and organizing the thousands of pages of notebooks that represented a lifetime of observation and inquiry. But as he began to study the accumulated work more carefully, he realized that Leonardo had left behind something more precious than any individual discovery. He had demonstrated a new way of thinking about the world. The notebooks revealed a mind that refused to accept the boundaries between disciplines that had constrained previous generations of scholars. In Leonardo's universe, the study of human anatomy led naturally to investigations of hydraulics, which in turn illuminated principles of engineering that could be applied to artistic composition. Everything was connected. Everything was part of a vast, intricate web of relationships that could only be understood through patient observation and creative synthesis. Word of Leonardo's death spread slowly across Europe, carried by merchants and diplomats, scholars and artists who had encountered the master during his wandering years. But it would take decades, even centuries, for the full significance of his achievement to be understood. The world was not yet ready for the kind of universal genius that Leonardo represented. The integration of art and science, theory and practice, spiritual insight and technical mastery. His anatomical studies, hidden away in private collections, would not be fully appreciated until medical science had advanced enough to confirm the accuracy of his observations. The cardiovascular system he had mapped with such precision, the nervous pathways he had traced through the human body, the mechanical principles he had discovered in the operation of muscles and bones, all of this would eventually be recognized as revolutionary contributions to scientific knowledge. The flying machines that had obsessed him throughout his life would remain impossible dreams until the development of lightweight engines and advanced materials. But the principles he had discovered through his patient study of birds, the relationship between wing design and lift, the importance of control surfaces, the need for understanding air currents, would ultimately enable human beings to achieve the ancient dream of flight. His artistic techniques, particularly the sfumato that had given such mysterious life to the Mona Lisa, would influence generations of painters who understood that he had fundamentally changed what art could achieve. The psychological depth he had brought to portraiture, the way he had used light and shadow to reveal inner life, the mathematical principles he had discovered underlying visual beauty, all of this would become part of the permanent treasury of human artistic achievement. But perhaps Leonardo's most important legacy was not any specific discovery or technique, but his demonstration that human curiosity itself was a sacred force. He had shown that the drive to understand, to create, to push beyond the boundaries of the known was what made human beings truly divine. In an age when knowledge was often compartmentalized and restricted, Leonardo had insisted that all truth was open to investigation, that every mystery was worthy of attention, that the universe itself was a book that could be read by anyone willing to learn its languages. The Renaissance that had nurtured Leonardo would eventually give way to new intellectual movements, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the modern age. But the spirit of inquiry that he embodied would continue to inspire those who refused to accept easy answers or conventional limitations. Centuries later, when human beings finally achieved powered flight, when they developed technologies that could see inside the living body without cutting it open, when they created machines that could think and calculate and even create art, they would recognize that these achievements had their origins in the notebooks of a man who had died in a French chateau in 1519, surrounded by questions he had spent a lifetime trying to answer. The scientific method that would revolutionize human understanding of the natural world was prefigured in Leonardo's approach to investigation. The combination of careful observation, creative hypothesis, and experimental testing that he had applied to everything from the flow of water to the structure of the human heart. The modern understanding of art as a means of exploring psychological and spiritual realities, rather than simply creating beautiful objects, could be traced back to Leonardo's portraits, where he had used visual techniques to reveal the depths of human consciousness. The recognition that technology should serve human flourishing rather than human domination found its earliest expression in Leonardo's troubled relationship with military engineering, his growing conviction that the purpose of knowledge was to create rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to elevate the human spirit rather than exploit human weakness. In universities and laboratories, in art studios and engineering workshops, wherever human beings gathered to push the boundaries of the possible, Leonardo's spirit continued to live. Not as a ghostly presence, but as a living example of what human beings could achieve when they approached the world with genuine curiosity, rigorous attention, and an unshakable faith in the fundamental beauty of existence. The questions he had asked about the nature of consciousness, about the relationship between mind and matter, about the ultimate purpose of human intelligence, remained as urgent and mysterious as they had been during his lifetime. Each generation would approach these questions with new tools and new perspectives, but the essential wonder that had driven Leonardo's investigations would remain the driving force behind all authentic human inquiry. In the growing twilight of the Renaissance, as the world moved toward new forms of knowledge and new ways of understanding human potential, Leonardo's legacy had become woven into the very fabric of Western civilization. He had demonstrated that the human spirit was capable of transcending the limitations of any particular time or place through the simple but revolutionary act of paying attention to the world with love, curiosity, and an endless willingness to learn. The boy who had once wandered the hills of Vinci, asking questions that adults couldn't answer, had become a permanent part of humanity's conversation with itself about what it means to be conscious, creative, and capable of wonder in a universe that would always remain larger than any individual understanding. 500 years have passed since Leonardo drew his last breath in the peaceful chambers of Clos, yet his presence continues to move through the world like ripples spreading across the surface of still water. In this final chapter of our journey together, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a recognition that some human spirits transcend the boundaries of their own mortality to become permanent sources of inspiration for all who come after. In laboratories around the world, researchers studying the mysteries of human consciousness echo Leonardo's anatomical investigations, but now with instruments he could never have imagined. Magnetic resonance scanners that can watch thoughts forming in living brains, computers that can model the electrical patterns of neural networks, artificial intelligences that begin to approach the complexity of human cognition. Yet the fundamental questions remain the same. How does awareness emerge from matter? What is the relationship between mind and body? How does the spark of consciousness create the miracle of human experience? In art studios and digital workshops, creators continue to explore the boundaries between representation and reality that Leonardo first mapped with his revolutionary painting techniques. They work with pixels instead of pigments, with virtual reality instead of linear perspective, with algorithms instead of mathematical proportions, but they are still trying to capture something essential about human experience, still seeking to reveal the hidden connections between inner and outer reality, still attempting to make visible the invisible depths of emotion and meaning. In engineering laboratories and aerospace facilities, the ancient dream of human flight that obsessed Leonardo has been fulfilled beyond his wildest imagination. Human beings have not only mastered the air, but have traveled to the moon, sent robotic explorers to other planets, and begun to dream of journeys to distant stars. Yet the principles he discovered through his patient study of birds, the relationship between form and function, the importance of understanding natural systems before attempting to improve upon them, remain fundamental to every advance in aviation and space exploration. The notebooks that Francesco Melzi struggled to organize have become among the most studied documents in human history. Scholars continue to decode Leonardo's mirror writing, to analyze his drawings, to trace the development of his ideas across decades of investigation. But more than historical curiosities, these notebooks remain living documents that continue to inspire new approaches to the integration of art and science, theory and practice, observation and imagination. In our own age of rapid technological change, when artificial intelligence begins to create art and scientific discoveries emerge from collaborations between human intuition and machine calculation, Leonardo's example becomes even more relevant. He demonstrated that the future belongs not to those who specialize narrowly in single disciplines, but to those who can think across boundaries, who can see connections that others miss, who can combine technical mastery with creative vision and ethical insight. The Mona Lisa continues to smile from behind her protective glass in the Louvre, visited by millions of pilgrims who come not just to see a famous painting, but to encounter something that transcends explanation. In that enigmatic expression, viewers continue to find reflections of their own deepest questions about identity, consciousness, and the mystery of what it means to be human in a vast and often incomprehensible universe. But perhaps Leonardo's greatest legacy is not any specific achievement, but the spirit of inquiry he embodied. The recognition that human beings are most fully themselves when they are learning, questioning, creating, and pushing beyond the boundaries of what they thought possible. In an age when specialized knowledge often creates barriers between different fields of human understanding, Leonardo's example reminds us that the most important discoveries often occur at the intersections between disciplines, in the spaces where art meets science, where ancient wisdom encounters modern insight, where technical capability serves spiritual aspiration. The child who once wandered the hills of Vinci, fascinated by the way water flowed around stones and birds commanded the sky, has become a permanent part of humanity's conversation with itself about its own potential. Every time a student looks at the world with genuine curiosity, rather than passive acceptance, every time an artist uses new technology to explore ancient questions about beauty and meaning, every time a scientist approaches research with the kind of aesthetic sensitivity that Leonardo brought to his anatomical studies, in all these moments, his spirit continues to live and work in the world. The Renaissance that gave birth to Leonardo was not just a historical period, but a state of mind. The recognition that human beings are capable of continuous rebirth, endless learning, infinite growth. That Renaissance continues wherever people refuse to accept that the boundaries of the possible have already been established, wherever curiosity triumphs over complacency, wherever the integration of different ways of knowing creates new possibilities for human flourishing. As our journey through Leonardo's life comes to its close, we are left not with answers, but with better questions, not with certainty, but with wonder, not with conclusions, but with an invitation to continue the conversation he began. In the quiet moments before sleep, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause before the next creative breakthrough, his voice continues to whisper the question that drove his entire life. What if we could see the world not as it appears to be, but as it truly is? A universe of infinite beauty, mystery, and possibility, waiting for those with eyes to see and hearts brave enough to love it completely. And in that question, spoken across 5 centuries but as fresh as tomorrow's dawn, we hear not just the voice of one remarkable man, but the eternal voice of human curiosity itself, forever young, forever eager, forever reaching toward the light.